We're smooth 98.1 FM. Welcome to Freshly Pressed, and it's time for us to serve the headlines from the local scene and get the analysts to get us help get better understanding and, of course, get your thoughts on the headlines also. My name is Omatseye, and I'm with
Zibby.
And so we'll begin this morning by saying big welcome to our analysts this morning as we say good morning to Chibuzor Nwaezeapu. Good morning, Chibuzor. Chibuzor, you have to unmute. All right. I also got here with us this morning, Gbubemi Atimomo. Good morning.
Good morning, Omatseye. Good morning, Zibby.
Good morning. All right, we're starting off with The Guardian. The federal government says it has concluded plans to set up a task force that will shut down all public buildings that have been found in breach of the Persons with Disabilities Act provision. Now, this basically states that all buildings should provide accessibility for people who have disabilities.
So if you remember, the Discrimination Against the Persons with Disabilities Act was signed into law by President Muhammadu Buhari in 2019, I think. The bill had been raised, I think, early in the 2000s, so it had lingered in the National Assembly for over about 10, 15 years. And the summary of the bill is that it basically criminalizes any form of discrimination against persons living with disabilities. One of the forms of discrimination was identified as access to public buildings, and part of the dictates was to ensure that all public buildings have facilities designed to provide access to persons living with disabilities. So, for example, ramps into the buildings, elevators, all forms of wider doors, all those sorts of things. And that was the provision that was set for all public and even private buildings. Now, if we look at compliance across the country, compliance has been quite poor. I know that we discussed this sometime a while back. For example, okay, let's even talk about the private sector buildings, for example. If we look at the average bank, a person who's on a wheelchair will not be able to get access into the building through those security doors. And most often, the security doors are the only doors available to the public. Or otherwise, they have to take them in through side doors. Now, in some cases, you find that even access into to get to the point where the security doors are is a challenge, so because there are only steps available, there are no ramps. So people who, for example, are on wheelchairs again, will find it hard to be able to access those kind of facilities because they'd have to be carried off their wheelchair. Their wheelchairs will have to be, pushed to the point of entry, and then they have to be back on their wheelchair. Same thing for people who have sight challenges, hearing challenges. These facilities are really not set up to accommodate so many people, which is a problem because we find that this excludes persons with disabilities from access to the general things that we or people who do not have disabilities take for granted. At the risk of being tautological again, granted, some of these things, might seem easy for people to implement, but then again, there are also challenges in the fact that it would most likely affect the architectural design of buildings in terms of remodeling said buildings, improving, structure of buildings, expenses required in, making changes to the way those buildings are, but these are, on the long run, the costs cannot be compared with the benefits, of opening up access to persons with disabilities. But they're exactly people like us. If we look at modern society, well, not that to say that we're not modern, but if we look at some other societies that have provided access to people like this, you can't tell the difference necessarily between people who live with disabilities and people who do not. And on this topic, since we're also talking about access to open buildings, we also need to talk about transportation as well, because our transportation facilities do not provide any form of access at all to persons living with disability.
And that's a fine place to go over now and say good morning once again to Chibuzor Nwaezeapu as you help us pick up a copy of the newspaper. Good morning. The Punch newspaper. Good morning. The Punch newspaper states here, federal government votes 50 billion naira for student loan, and that's coming on the heels of the pronouncement that was made about a few months ago. And then it's just barely a month before it is 2024 when it is set to take off.
So one of the first bills that was signed in by the president when he resumed was the bill for the Student Loan Act. And one of the challenges when that was presented, it came with particular provisions. And I recall when we reviewed it, we had some concerns with the provisions. And one of the big questions was how it was going to be funded. Now the president has come out with the what I suspect is the initial funding for it, because this is going to be a progressive need to be able to help sort out the issues that we have with education, at least at tertiary level. Now, I think it's oversimplifying, and this is my personal opinion, that we're oversimplifying that this will sort out the needs for students to fund, because even in looking at the law itself, some of the provisions restrict a huge chunk of people from accessing tertiary education at current rates. So what we've actually even seen in the last few months and last year since that bill was announced, or the act was signed in, was that you've seen universities or tertiary education institutions increasing their tuition fees and increasing other sundry fees. Now, let's not forget that tuition, while this is going to fund tuition, a huge chunk of there are other costs associated with having going to universities in Nigeria today or tertiary institutions in Nigeria today. How far will this funding go? And taking into context that the absence of funding or absence of other means where students can actually get funding to go to school, it's a bit of a challenge. So for me also, one of the things I'd raised previously is that there needs to be a look back at the law and look at the various provisions. While this looks good for starts, or this will kick off the program, taking into consideration the other things that are going to be impacted, like if universities are going to still increase their tuition fees, it's going to stretch this a bit. What about the long-term funding? And how much are we learning from the challenges that other governments, other countries who have student loans are facing? Because, for instance, in the US, it is a big problem of the high level of student debt and the impact on people when they eventually get jobs. And the flip side for Nigeria is that these people are only going to be able to pay back these loans when they get jobs. How many people in Nigeria are employed today? How possible is it, based on the amount that you're giving, even if it's zero interest, how quickly can these people pay back these loans? Are we going to fall into that same pit where the government is going to keep having to loan money or get money to fund this bottomless pit? Then we are still back at the problem we're trying to solve in the first place. So is this the solution? Are there going to be other solutions? Are we going to have other solutions from financial institutions where they would also be able to issue loans at little or no interest to be able to fund this? Does the business case exist for it? What other things are we looking at? Because it's very simplistic for me for when the president says there will be no more strikes. You will have strikes for different reasons. Already, as he's asking that this should actually be a grant and not a loan. So there are a lot of complications around it, but I think in looking at solving problems, you also need to look at the systems. Maybe I'm overestimating it and I'm not aware of what the government is putting into place, but that's why I see it from my own point of view. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Chibuzor. Let us know what your thoughts are. The WhatsApp number is 0809 444 0981. And you can also catch the live stream up on our YouTube channel, Smooth981, or tweet at Smooth981. Let's move on to The Guardian. 7 months after handing quit notice to 22,500 police officers who live in 25 barracks that have been marked for demolition by the Lagos state government, the Nigeria Police Force is yet to effect payment of rent to the displaced officers.
So I was passing by, I think it was the barracks at Kenja over the weekend, and I passed by another one somewhere else. I can't quite remember. I was just reflecting on the state of those facilities, because looking at them, it is boring. And these people are still living there because clearly they haven't been paid and they don't have anywhere else to go. So on the discussion of the demolition, it is overdue. When we talk about the morale of the police, living facilities is one key factor that affects them. Because I can imagine a policeman that comes out of such facilities into society, he cannot execute his work properly. They have drainage issues, they have sanitation issues, space issues. Those facilities are deplorable. So one would have expected that identifying all of this, which was one of the reasons why Lagos State had recommended to police to demolish and rebuild them. that the police would also have taken this as a very serious thing to do and would have commenced this. Because as it is now, because these people have not been paid, they're still living in those barracks. And because they're still living in those barracks, the demolition cannot take place. Now, these sums have been earmarked in the budget. It would be nice to know what exactly it is that is delaying the release of the funds to the officials. It would also be nice to know how these funds will be released to them. So will it be released to them as a bulk payment? Will they be expected to find accommodation and then the police will pay on their behalf? Or probably, the police is trying to identify the best structure to use in terms of administering these funds to make sure, that these funds are well utilized. I'm not sure, because I'm really just wondering what exactly the delay is, but this is long overdue, and even looking at the fact that, the assumption has been made that it will take about 2 years to build all of those facilities. I'm hoping that it can stick to that timeline as well, because if it exceeds that, that means that they have to budget extra money to provide for rent for these people while the constructions are going on. So, like I said, it would be nice to know exactly what the issue is with the police and why these funds have not been released, because it is no overdue.
Thank you, Gbubemi.
Chibuzor, let's go over and talk some Naira dollar issues and see how they are relating or standing shoulder to shoulder this morning. So let's quickly pick up this one, and it's from the Punch newspaper. The Naira falls by 17% to 951 Naira to a US dollar. That's what it is stating as at Wednesday. Is there a chance that the dollar and the Naira relating today, we might have good news to share about? Talk us through this.
So, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, I couldn't hear anybody. So the Naira has fallen once again by 17% to 951 Naira, 951.
Chibuzor?
That's the
Chibuzor, can you hear us? Because we're having trouble hearing you. All right, let's go on to some of the messages that we have coming through. This one is from AB, and AB says, the measure of a society is how the least, and least in quotes, among us are treated by the rest of us.
Wow.
Okay, Chibuzor, you can go ahead now if you can hear us.
I can hear you. I can hear you clearly.
Please go ahead. Thank you. Okay, let's go on to the messages while Chibuzor sorts out the internet connection. AB says, the measure of a society is how the least among us are treated by the rest of us. And this can be seen especially in the built environment. The former president hit a high point on signing into law rules that require access provision for persons with disabilities, and I applaud him for that. Joseph Menyi says,
please help us use the medium to reach to relevant security agencies. And it says this is because Iyana Baja to Isheri to Iyano Bagsis have become an axis of grey menace of pickpocketing, one chance, and night robberies. Major culprits are the tricycles, both mini and big buses.
All right. And we hope that the authorities actually swing into action. Ajayi says, I consider this provision of 50 billion Naira student loan as a ploy to further deny students access to higher education, as so many students will not be able to access the loan while the institutions have been tactically given approval to hike fees. It appears the government is trying to abandon its responsibility of providing education to the citizens, and that message is from Ajayi. The WhatsApp number is 0809 444 0981.
Chibuzor, we're glad to have you back. So let's get back and get your thoughts relating to the Naira and the dollar at 951 to a dollar.
So yes, the dollar has fallen on the Naira fallen on the I&E window to the dollar. From the start of about 842, it's dropped to 951 at the end of Wednesday. It's the premise is largely due to the shortages in dollar supply to the market, and while the CBN has been trying to pull all these stunts to ensure that we have enough sufficient dollars coming into the system to be able to help the market, to help the currency retain its value, there are still shortages, and that is reflecting. Obviously, when we look at the fall compared to it. So we are going to see some of those fluctuations, especially as we come towards the end of the year. There were some comments by the CBN governor about fiscal deficits and public debt increases that piled pressure on the external reserves.
You're listening to Freshly Pressed on Smooth 98.1. The conversation will continue on the other side. Stay with us.
My network is horrible.
Chibuzor.
I can't understand what's happening here. It's
oh wow.
So I'm supposed to be in some hotel facility. It's so bad.
Okay, are you using the hotel's Wi-Fi?
I was trying to use it. I've had to switch to my mobile, and I don't know. Let me try the hotel's Wi-Fi again. I don't know. Please.
Okay.
Stop everything in the morning and more. Conversation, a little more action. Weekday mornings, 6 till 10.
Okay, Chims, are we back? Okay, we'll just go on to Gbubemi's headline and then we'll come back to you.
Music. Stay tuned to Smooth 98.1.
Okay.
Press Smooth 98.1 FM is still freshly pressed, and we're picking up the headlines as we get on to Gbubemi now to help us get the next paper going.
This one is coming from The Nation. Ogun State government yesterday says it will provide a befitting accommodation for victims of gender-based violence. The governor made this known yesterday.
Okay, this is a very welcome development from the Ogun State government. Gender-based violence is something that has been with us for a while. In fact, it's a matter that has made the headlines in more recent times, where people have realized that even within families, within close relationships and friends, because there's all forms of gender-based violence. And it's interesting to know that it's not just affecting women, but also affecting men as well, because there's been research that has shown that men also suffer from this, but largely do not really speak about it. So the accommodation for victims of gender-based violence is a work of development, because very often you find that when you read reports of instances of people who've been abused, by a family member or by someone that they stay with, typically, when they report to the police and all of that, whatever is done, they still have to go back to those houses. So they're potentially exposed to continuous gender-based violence. So what this accommodation would do is to try and reduce that exposure for them. However, one house is okay. But the state is a large state. It would be nice if this could be something considered across local governments, because whatever accommodation it is would probably be insufficient to address the amount of people that are potentially exposed to it across the state. Granted, also this facility would not be a permanent facility for people to be one where people come in and come out, after they probably be resettled or not. So it would be nice for government to look at that. One other key thing is the government is mulling the institution of the Gender-Based Violence Fund, which would be used to cater to the welfare of people who have been exposed to gender-based violence and will come under the government shelter during that period. That's also a welcome development. And that's something that I think that states across the country could also consider to emulate and institute in their states as well. The governor has committed to ensuring that they will work together with the courts to make sure that also that the victims of gender-based violence also experience a smooth experience through their legal proceedings to enable them get justice as well. So that's also a welcome development. So kudos to the Ogun State government. However, we'd like to also see this initiative spread across at least all of the local governments and not just have state.
And we go over now to Chibuzor Nwaezeapu to pick up a Daily Post newspaper. And as you help us unpack this headline, also you can also string that to the dollar naira rate in summary as you go into this headline. 2024 budget will achieve 61% increase in health sector to reduce japa. That's what the Federal Capital Territory Administration, FCTA, is assuring the residents.
Okay, so we're going to try and tap both stories. We're talking earlier about the drop in the naira to the dollar, and the central bank governor pointed it out. Part of the issues were tied to fiscal issues, and I think earlier in the week we were looking at Nigeria's balance of trade at the end of third quarter, and it pointed out some of those fiscal issues. So obviously, to sort out the naira to dollar, we need more inflow coming into the more inflow coming in, and that inflow will come from the fiscal policies being coming into place and actually generating that value, creating that value within the economy. Now, coming specific to this story, we have the Secretary of Health and Human Services Secretary at FCTA, and that's Dr. Adida Dolapo Fashawe, was speaking to the journalists, and he mentioned that there's going to be a 61% increase in the health sector which will reduce japa. And he pointed out that from the budget, there's going to be a 61% increase in what they collected in previous budgets in this current budget. The current question for me is, current question for me will be how much we're really collecting, and how, when we talk about this budget, what is the amounts allocated to the sector? What are they supposed to do? Because in the budgets, when we look through the budgets, we see a lot of inflow into recurrent expenditure. Now it's, and as Dr. Fashawe has pointed out, a lot of the issues are not only tied to wages and salaries, but also providing the right environment for people to work. So he's saying, for every doctor that leaves the system, they'll replace the person, that they have people looking for jobs, which also speaks to the rate of unemployment we have within the country. And at some point, there's also a plea by Dr. Eriti Kingibe, who is the senator representing FCT from the Labour Party, begging doctors not to relocate abroad. Now, we can beg and plead and ask and promise, but it's how, when those things come into ground, that we actually convince these medical practitioners of whatever decision they need to take the best. And we're not just asking them to just stay because we are pleading with them. We need to create the right environment, which is a lot of these comments are speaking to, where they can actually dedicate their work and their time to actually serve the people and give the people the best facilities they require. We already have a shortage of doctors if you look at the doctor-patient ratio in our population, we already have a shortage. And we need to sort that, and JAPA has actually increased that shortfall. So we need to solve both problems at the same time while creating that environment. So looking at how much we're going to, 61% increase of 1% doesn't say much. And I'm just using 1% as a placeholder here. It's what actual value is the amounts that we're giving, and what is it going to be used for, that we actually create this value. So we wait to see how this comes across at the end of the day.
All right, thank you for that, Chibuzor. The WhatsApp number 0809 444 0981. Ladele Johnson. All right, thank you for that, Ladele Johnson. Let's move on to the next headline. And this one is coming from The Nation. Farmers in Ilobu community in Osun State protested yesterday against alleged harassment, intimidation, and looting of their farm produce. These acts, according to them, are being carried out by indigenes of a nearby community. For Chibuzor?
Not Chibuzor's.
Oh, sorry, I didn't know it was mine. So this is our this is a communal crisis within Osun and Oyo. Well, it started in Osun State, and obviously Osun used to be part of Oyo State. What we have is we have farmers in the Repodun local government of Osun State who protest against the harassment, intimidation, and looting of their farm produce by indigenes of another community. Now, these clashes have happened over land disputes, and as usual, as what we see in Nigerian instances like this has resulted in a loss of lives and property. The story basically talks of the impact of what has happened and the invasion of particular localities within those areas, how it has impacted homelessness, helplessness, poverty, because they can't engage in economic activities because of threats to life. And they're basically calling upon the state and security operatives to actually help them solve the problem. And it's straight from where it started from in Osun State and it's spilled over to parts of Oyo State. Now, there's also a comment by the Secretary of Boundary Affairs to the governor, trying to step into the issue and trying to calm down nerves. But these are not new issues for us in Nigeria. And unfortunately, in 2023, going to 2024, we are still dealing with issues of boundaries. We are still dealing with issues of communal clashes. We are still dealing with issues of loss of land, even within our smaller areas. So it tells me that even within those small units, when we're having this kind of challenges, what happens to the larger entity called Nigeria? So what we need is obviously clear delineation of lands and borders within communities. Although for me personally, I would actually like to see them go, but we need some clear delineation, as these people are still holding on to their traditions, their cultures, their properties, and their economic activities. We need some form of I don't like using the word committees, but actually we have people who are supposed to take care of this kind of instances actually doing their work and ensuring that these communities are meeting regularly to have clear discussions, have clear findings, have clear actions they need to take on these things, because these are outcomes of previous fragmentation of those particular units. And once people hold on to what their historical boundaries are, and once these things can be discussed and can come to some form of agreement, then they can all move forward and move forward with their lives instead of having to look over their shoulders and having to lose lives and lose their economic activities. So for me, at the end of the day, the state government or the local, starting with the local governments, because we need to see local governments swing into actions, need to come into these issues. And if it needs to go to the state governments, they need to swing into the issues and get the communities involved in solving their problem, because that's what it is at the end of the day. The communities need to solve these problems themselves.
And that's where we draw the curtain this morning on Freshly Pressed on Smooth 98.1 FM. I've been speaking with Chibuzor Nwaezeapu. Say thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thank you, Omas. Thank you, Zibby. Thank you, Lagos.
And also we say thank you to Gbubemi Atimomo for your time.
Thank you, Omas. Thank you, Zibby. Thank you, Lagos.
But that also looks like there is a plan here. Let's see if this message falls in sync with what we are doing. And that's from Dr. I at CMS saying, I'm worried about the lack of interrogation by the press of all the government announcements. Are we producing enough doctors that they are so easy to find? And is it only doctors who are leaving the sector? No figures as to the number of doctors to be recruited or how many were lost to Jagba. Nigerians will see next year the effect of these rhetorics. Dr. I at CMS.
All right. Well, thank you for your messages. Thank you for listening. And do stay with us. There's a lot more to come on the Smooth Breakfast this morning. In about 15 minutes, it will be time for the Grapevine. And at 9 a.m., we'll get talking on Lagos Talk. Stay with us.